If you don't eat meat, others will eat you. This sentence comes from The Vegetarian by Han Jiang, the new Nobel Prize winner in literature. Carefully interpret the content of the novel. The heroine Yeong-hye suddenly disappeared from the mental hospital. After the doctors searched for a long time, they finally found her on a hillside. And the scene was very strange. It was like a big tree, wet by the rain, standing motionless on the hillside. The beginning of all this story was on a night 3 years ago. Our heroine Yeong-hye had a dream, and then she never ate meat again. Then the novel is about the 4 people who are closest to Yeong-hye after she stopped eating meat. They each see it from their own perspective. The story begins to unfold. First, it is about our Yeong-hye's husband. Yeong-hye's husband found that Yeong-hye woke up at a certain night and stared at the refrigerator. And the next day, he threw away all the meat in the refrigerator. At this time, as a husband, his first reaction was not worry, but what? Anger. An uncontrolled anger. He did not ask why Yeong-hye did not eat meat, nor did he care about his health. Instead, he grabbed his wrist like crazy, scolded him and ordered him. Why is this so? The author did not give a direct reason, but began to write about the process of the 2 people falling in love from the perspective of the husband. When the 2 were in love before, at that time, the husband was not attracted to his wife. He even thought that his wife had an ordinary appearance, an ordinary personality, and everything else. But it was precisely because of this that the husband finally chose to marry her. There is a very clever psychological description here. The reason why I married him was because he had no special charm and no special shortcomings. And because of this, I felt comfortable. In this way, I didn't need to pretend to be knowledgeable and talented in order to win his heart. Nor did I need to rush around because I was late for a date. Those smart, beautiful, and charming women who were described as rich girls would only make me feel uncomfortable. So after reading this, we understand why the husband did not ask his wife what she had dreamed about when she had an abnormal reaction, but scolded her and was angry. To be precise, he did not appreciate his wife as an independent woman. What he needed was a reference for his own lazy life. Now the reference was broken. He was very angry. Not only was he angry that he could not provide himself with more delicious meat, but that he did not get his consent. So he just hoped that his wife could quickly return to the boring, but normal and trouble-free woman. He said that he was the one I picked again and again in this world, and he was just ordinary. After a while, because she no longer eats meat, she has become very thin. But the husband still doesn't care about his wife. Until something happens, he feels that this matter is very important and he needs to pay attention to it. What is it? Before getting married, Yeong-hye actually had a little habit or a little fetish, which is not to wear underwear. Regarding this little habit, before getting married, the husband thought in his heart that he said that once, I accidentally put my hand on his back. When I found that I couldn't touch the underwear bag through the sweater, I became inexplicably excited. Is he hinting at something to me? I think at this point, I couldn't help but look at him differently. But it was because of this habit that he finally got into a big trouble. The husband had an important dinner party soon. This was the first time the president invited the couple to attend the dinner party. He felt that the boss really appreciated his performance, so he didn't want his wife to mess up or ruin his promotion plan. So before going to dinner, the husband told him, "You really have to perform well for me." And the moment everyone sat down, the husband's face changed immediately. Why? Because he took off his coat, revealing his wife in a tight sweater. At this time, everyone was stunned. The husband, suddenly the son saw that the president's wife was also staring at his wife. At this moment, he felt that the matter had come to an end. He had to tell his father-in-law and mother-in-law. Why? In fact, his request to his wife was that you should not embarrass me and serve me well. But now your eccentricity has actually affected my interests. Well, at this time, the second key person appeared, which was Yeong-hye's parents. Normally, if our parents heard that their daughter did not eat meat, her body would have become very weak. Wouldn't they have to take good care of her health? But Yeong-hye's parents were not like that. Their first reaction to the news was, "Apologiwo should I apologize to?" Apologize to his son-in-law. "This child is really worrying. I am too ashamed to see you." Yeong-hye's father also said that he cannot eat meat. "But you are a strong young man. I am really sorry for you." These two apologies are very accurate. They also cruelly point out that for Yeong-hye, what is his life? In fact, it is his functionality. So his parents are not concerned about his body, but about his body, can no longer provide services for his husband. At this moment, the daughter does not seem to be an independent person, but a puppet made by an essential oil craftsman. Marrying is equivalent to selling to the next buyer. Once a certain thread corners broken, then the previous owner must apologize to his new owner. So on Yeong-hye's mother's birthday, I asked the whole family to come to his house for a meal. No one said anything, but everyone except Yeong-hye knew this would be a trial for Yeong-hye. Yeong-hye's father first picked up a piece of sweet and sour pork and put it next to Yeong-hye's mouth. Then he persuaded him kindly to open his mouth and eat a bit. Your body is so weak, I'm doing this for your own good. But seeing that Yeong-hye didn't respond, he asked Yeong-hye's mother to change it to beef and put it next to Yeong-hye's mouth. Yeong-hye, who had been silent all the time, spoke up. He said, I don't want to eat it. This rejection was this was incredible. It shocked Yeong-hye's father and brother. They even roared together. Yeong-hye's father was enraged. He slapped Yeong-hye fiercely. He ordered others to grab Yeong-hye's arms with their hands. He roared that if he took a bite, he would eat meat again. There are no people in the world who don't eat meat. He picked up another piece of meat, grabbed Yeong-hye's arm, and forced the meat into Yeong-hye's mouth. He twisted her lips hard. Yeong-hye must have been struggling. He immediately used his other hand to force open Yeong-hye's mouth. The author described a detail very cleverly here. That is, the father and brother were shocked by the fact that Yeong-hye, what Hye said was not, Dad, I'm sorry. I don't want to eat, but I don't eat meat. This actually explains the source of his father's anger. It was actually because this was a challenge to his absolute authority. So in such a struggle, a piece of meat was unexpectedly stuffed into Yeong-hye's mouth. He would spit it out immediately. Then he rushed to the entrance, picked up the fruit knife on the table, gritted his teeth and stared. Just stared. Staring with his eyes wide open, and made this move. The brother-in-law, who had been watching from the side, rushed to Yeong-hye's side at this time, carried Yeong-hye on his back, and sent him to the hospital. Then he entered the hospital. After being hospitalized, Yeong-hye was actually very weak. His mother kept passing goat soup to his mouth, persuading him to drink it. But Yeong-hye still refused to eat it. His mother was very angry, and said, Look at you. If you don't eat meat now, the whole world will eat you. In fact, seeing this, we can find that no one has ever asked Yeong-hye about her dream from beginning to end, asking why she suddenly stopped eating meat. Her husband, father, mother and brother would only force her to eat meat. Now let's see what she dreamed about. She dreamed of a forest. In the forest, she found such a very hidden, a mysterious place. Hundreds of huge red pieces of meat fell on the long bamboo poles. Some of the pieces were still dripping with blood. I pushed aside the countless pieces of meat in front of me and walked forward, but I couldn't find the exit on the other side. The white clothes on my body had already been soaked with blood. I ran upstream for a long time. Suddenly, the forest became bright. The aroma of food filled my nose. An indescribable brilliant scene appeared in front of me. On the bank of the flowing stream, many families who came out for a picnic sat on the ground. Some people were grilling meat on the side. Singing and laughter were heard everywhere, but I felt very scared because I was covered in blood. Shinru's dream started the whole thing. The metaphor of this novel, eating meat, is actually a metaphor for violence. The rules of human society are that as long as you live in this world, you will be subjected to violence by lives higher than you, and at the same time oppress lives lower than you. How to judge whether it is lower or higher is the inherent and conventional social hierarchy. In the world of Trice, he is obviously at the bottom of this concept, so he has to accept layers of violence. If you have a sense of meaning for this set of rules, then it is like what his mother said. If you don't eat meat now, the whole world will eat you because you won't die if you don't eat meat. Forcing people to death has never been a sacred object or behavior. It is not the value concept behind this, which is to use violence as a tool for punishment. If you do not conform to this social concept, you will be punished by this violence and then devoured by your own kind. However, among such a group of violent perpetrators, besides the sister who has been holding her father, there is another person who did not participate. Do you remember who was the first to pick up Yeong-hye and take her to the hospital? That was the brother-in-law. The brother-in-law is the third important character, that is, the evil version of artist Fu Jiaming I mentioned. The brother-in-law is an artist. He has not produced any works for many years. So he has no income? He can only rely on his wife's shop to make a living. Do you remember what kind of woman Yeong-hye is in the eyes of Yeong-hye's husband? Yes. She is ordinary and boring. She is the ordinary woman he picked over and over again. But in the eyes of her brother-in-law, Yeong-hye seems to be a completely different person. Her sister once mentioned that Yeong-hye has a birthmark on her buttocks. This birthmark obviously became her brother-in-law's bell. When he thought of this birthmark, he would feel a thrilling pleasure sweeping over his body. Just like when he rushed up to hug Yeong-hye and went to the hospital, he actually thought this in his heart. His blood solidified into red bean-colored blood stains. This made me feel that there was a shocking hint that could not be explained by fate. Listen, this is another hint. Sounds familiar? Yeong-hye didn't wear underwear before. It's also a hint to her husband. So the two of them are actually the same. But don't forget, my brother-in-law is an artist. The evil version of an artist. This kind of artist is very good at turning their desires into art. We are talking about this impulse. This kind of stimulation gave him inspiration. He wanted to create something. What is it? Doesn't Yeong-hye have a birthmark on his body? He wants to paint flowers all over this birthmark. Then he paints flowers all over his body. Then the two people painted with flowers do some unspeakable things. So the explosive clip comes. This is what the book says on her birthmark. The red flowers on her body. Repeated blooming and contraction. This is the ugliest in the world and the most beautiful picture, and when the brother-in-law was there, the face of the brother-in-law also appeared in his mind. He thought that person had a worldly and profit-seeking face. When the image of them entangled together appeared in his mind, he felt that it was simply an insult, defilement, and violence. Oh my God, I felt goosebumps all over my body when I read this. I think the author Han Jiang, she really wrote it too accurately. Saw through the eyes of the brother-in-law that Yeong-hye's husband had some kind of brutal blasphemy against Yeong-hye. And at the same time, the author also exposed the deeper level of violence of this artist brother-in-law against Yeong-hye. That is, using art as a robe and understanding as needlework, emotionally embroidered with appreciation, sympathy, and praise, as clear and bright as a shining diamond in this 5-color. What was hidden under the colorful robe was actually the selfish desire of his most filthy comrade. The next morning, when the artist's brother-in-law woke up and wanted to appreciate the wonderful artwork he had taken yesterday, his camera was gone. As he was looking around, he found a woman lying on the dining table. It was his wife, Yeong-hye's sister. It was very bloody, right? But Yeong-hye's sister's reaction was very wonderful. It was written that the wife slowly raised her head and said quietly that I couldn't contact Yeong-hye. I came to take a look before going to work. I just got some materials. That's right, as a perfect wife, facing the bloody and cruel situation of her husband cheating on her sister, she chose to be in love with her carelessly. Explanation. But as a sister, she still chose to protect her sister. Then she started to yell, "Asshole, you asshole, you actually did that to the mentally confused Yeong-hye, to her like that? I called an ambulance. You and Yeong-hye, both of you need treatment." Next, let's look at the fourth important character, the sister's perspective. In the previous family dinner, the only person who had been holding the violent father tightly was the sister Yeong-hye. After being sent to the mental hospital, Yeong-hye hadn't eaten for a long time. She was so thin that she didn't have any meat at all. She even weighed less than 30 kilograms. There was no good vein on the back of her arms and heels. There was not even a place to insert an injection. So the sister went to the doctor at this time. I went to the hospital to see Yeong-hye. I also brought a lot of food to Yeong-hye, but Yeong-hye didn't eat it. At this time, Yeong-hye stared at a tree outside the window. She told her sister that she didn't want to think about anything. She wanted to become a tree with all her heart. It might sound a bit weird, but the metaphor of the tree here is an absolute purity. After Yeong-hye suffered violence from her husband, father, and brother-in-law, what she longed for was a world that didn't need to harm anything and always existed in absolute innocence. She said, "Sister, do you know that all the trees in the world are hands and feet?" She believes that all the trees in the world are actually upside down. They are not as still as they seem on the surface. In fact, they have been silently supporting themselves with their hands. She supported herself and exerted her strength silently. But people obviously could not understand her sister's thoughts. She actually hoped that her sister could survive. So in order to keep her sister alive, because Yeong-hye had not eaten, the doctors and nurses had to put a gastric tube in Yeong-hye. Then the most desperate scene in the whole novel was the violence standing on the edge of salvation and destruction. The nurses rushed forward and tied Yeong-hye's hands and feet. They used their hands to fix her struggling face. They inserted the gastric tube into her nostrils. Then blood gushed out of Yeong-hye's mouth. The sister who saw this scene finally couldn't bear it anymore. She decided to give up. She grabbed the head nurse's wrist and begged the doctor and nurse frantically. The nurses were able to stop. Yeong-hye was already dying. She was lying in her arms, twitching. Sister Rin-hui made a choice. Although she still couldn't understand her sister, who wanted to be a tree, but because of love, she chose to respect, before she understood. The novel ends with this sentence. She took a breath quietly and stared at the burning trees on the roadside. They were like countless beasts standing up, emitting green light. Her eyes were dark and persistent, as if she was waiting for an answer. It was more like expressing a protest. When this novel was first published 17 years ago, the evaluation was completely opposite to the current one. 17 years ago, most people commented that this work was actually whining without reason and had no logic. But now you will find that there are a lot of people who can fully understand Yeong-hye's pain. In this world, what is more terrible than misery is actually the unknown misery. Once information is open and circulated, society will have the lever to promote change. Just like in this novel, the sister who was also destroyed by the violence of human nature, she was in pain, but didn't know it, but thought she was born with defects. Because she didn't realize it, she was used to endure it and never spoke out. This is exactly why this novel is not narrated in the first person. Because Yeong-hye is an absolute protagonist, she has no voice of her own. She is always in a position of being observed, desired, misunderstood, and sympathized. So, in fact, constant pain is the first step to healing yourself and then healing the world. Alright, this part of the story ends here.
Want to know what happened next? Let's listen to the breakdown next time.